It's Speaking with Gravity, and I'm Kervin, one of your hosts, and I have co-hosts with me.
It's your girl, D to the double league.
Hey, it's Ty.
And on this podcast, we talk about mental health and how everything affects everything. As one of your hosts, I want you to know I'm a son and brother, a husband and father, a friend who happens to be a therapist. And when you sit with therapists, the conversation is different. With every episode, the goal is to have a conversation that's going to make you think, make you feel, make you do what's best for you. I'm a therapist, but this isn't therapy. It's a podcast. We got a disclaimer?
While we serve as mental health professionals, the information and content being discussed during our podcast is not intended to be utilized or substituted as therapy. The purpose of this broadcasting is to share our personal perspectives through open dialogue about various content based on our personal, educational, and professional experience.
And today we have a topic that is really, really serious. Suicide is the 10th leading cause of death as of 2018, and the second leading cause of death among African American children ages 10 through 14. Now, as I kind of give out some of these facts are like, they can be confusing because they're going to say different numbers, but they kind of, I don't know the word for it, they kind of cross over each other. Some of them are 10 to 14. Something might say between 2001 to 2020. Some might be a 5-year gap, but they're all relevant. The bottom line is when it comes down to suicide, it's becoming more and more prevalent in the African American community, and even more so amongst the younger generation of African Americans. Pre-COVID, nearly 12 million people reported thoughts of suicide. 1.4 million attempted the suicide. So, let's talk about suicide. The rising of this pandemic, so to speak, or this phenomenon. What is suicide? What's the background behind it? What is it connected to? In the book, The Black Guide to I just messed that up. The Unapologetic Guide to Black Mental Health by Dr. Rita Walker talks about how recent research suggested that the increase of suicide amongst African American children in comparison to European children increased significantly for boys and girls. So going back to what I was saying earlier, let's kind of just talk about what suicide is, suicide ideation, plans, attempts, so on and so forth. I'm going to let y'all kind of break me in on that one. Y'all. One of y'all.
All right, so when we're talking about suicidal ideation, you're basically talking about the actual thought of suicide. So a person may be experiencing thoughts where, they no longer see value in life. They no longer want to actually be here, or they feel like they would be things or circumstances or situations or even other people would be better off if they were dead. So that's basically when you're dealing with ideation. It's just a thought.
Just a thought, yeah.
Right. When you move into actual planning, it means now a person has basically decided a method in which they are wanting to carry out the thought of suicide. So a person may be saying they're going to intend on overdosing. They may say they intend on, slitting, their wrist, their necks, or whatever the case may be, or they may be, wanting to purchase a gun or whatever the case may be. So at that point, they've kind of narrowed down the method in which they want to carry out the act of suicide. And then we move into suicidal attempts. And so this is when that person may put that plan and those thoughts into action. And so that's when, they may attempt, to shoot themselves. They may attempt to overdose. They may, attempt to engage in an activity that could be, lethal. And then we move into death by suicide, which means the person was actually able to be successful in committing the act. And so that means that, that person becomes deceased at that point. So there's different, stages of suicide when we're looking at it. And a lot of times, when people are introduced to this concept, people always think suicide means the death component, but there's actually kind of like, I don't want to say stages, but there's different processes in this act or this idea of suicide.
Different aspects to it.
Right.
And then we also connected to somebody wanting attention,
Right.
somebody acting crazy in quotation marks, or just it's almost as if, not that we don't take it serious, but we don't collectively as a community, we don't connect it to what it really is. That be a cry for help, or maybe something going on, or something something in their mind that's leading them to feel this way, instead of we're focusing on the fact that they're crazy or they just want attention. That's not necessarily the case. What do we look for when we are talking about somebody who could be suicidal or just have that connection with them? What are we looking for? And I'm gonna say, one of the things that we have out here is mood swings. And then, again, we said earlier at the beginning of the podcast, we said ages 10 through 14. And what happens from ages 10 through 14? Puberty. Right. And then, of course, they go from being up under mama and daddy. Right now, my kids, with the exception of my son, they still hug on me as soon as I come through the door. But as they get older, that's gonna change, just for the fact of puberty. But is it change? Well, I say just for the fact of puberty. Do it change because of puberty, or is it changing because of something else? And as parents, or people, guardians, or people connected to them, we have to really figure out, why are their moods different, or do they have mood swings first of all, and then why are they having those?
I think we gotta kind of touch back on kind of breaking down the layers that you kind of identified when we talk about one, what happens with the idea of suicide amongst African American children, or just in general, is what you mentioned on is the dismissiveness of it.
Yes.
Because a lot of times, it is that attention seeking behavior, or they just saying something because people truly don't really know how to respond to the notion of suicide. You know what I'm saying? A lot of times when people are dealing with it, especially if you're a parent, or if you're someone who maybe you've had similar thoughts, you really don't know what to say. And a lot of times people assume, they don't want to say anything that may make the person do it, or that, you know what I'm saying? It's the idea that, you don't have the language or the words to say into that. And I know from my personal experience, especially working with adolescents, in my previous employment, a lot of the times children were crying for help. And that would be something that they would say, but a lot of it stemmed from a lot of issues that they were having, that they felt like they couldn't openly talk about. So I think that's one of the most powerful things. So when you start seeing where you see changes in your child's behavior, that's going to be also a key indicator that something may be wrong. When you talk about, the change in mood swings, a lot of times, just like I think anybody, children especially, have various exposures of emotions. And so when you don't really know how to express what you're experiencing, and then too, looking at the age gaps, where oftentimes children aren't respected. Their opinions and their feelings aren't validated. And so most of the time, what ends up happening, they have to internalize those emotions, right? And so those behaviors start leading to what they're actually seeing. I think one of the other components you have to take into consideration is the age group that you're looking at. That's also when there's a lot of social type of influence, right? A lot of what they're seeing, a lot of the music that they're listening to, a lot of just people in general, and just language, and just dealing with a lot of things. I know for me personally, being in the school system, it's hard. I can truly say it is hard for a lot of children to deal with some of the changes, because when I went into the school, kids were saying some mean stuff. You know what I'm saying? And that really, I think, impacts a lot of people. And so I'm just imagining, some of them hearing those same things at home, or going home and hearing or seeing different things and just knowing that you're different, it creates a lot of negativeness. So a lot of times some kids would just say it, you know what I'm saying, that they were wanting to commit suicide. So I think it's just a lot of different aspects that you really have to look at, and I think it's just listening even for the things that they're not saying.
Yeah, and when you say about being dismissive, and you said the word validate, I love that. We have to be able to validate our children, give them an opportunity to say what is on their mind. And we cannot forget their reality is real to them. Even though we've went through, I've went through fifth grade, I went through seventh grade, and things were the way they were in the 90s or 2000s. They're different now.
Right.
The more things change, the more they stay the same. They're still going to have to struggle with peer pressure. They're going to have to struggle with the changes in their body. But in addition to that, they now have the internet to compete with. I only had the guys that were in my classroom or in my middle school that I had to compare myself to body-wise. But now you have the internet and you're comparing yourself to the whole wide world. The what is it? The whole wide world web or whatever it was. So just being able to validate whatever their reality is. And then in addition to that, when we say 10 and 14, we're talking, you said the key, we're talking 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade, and 8th grade. And depending on where you are in the country, here is 5th grade going into 6th grade, you're changing into middle school.
Right.
There are some places where middle school is from 6, you're switching from 6th to 7th grade. And then some places allow that 9th grade. I don't know if they still do or not. At one time, 9th grade was a part of like the middle school in some places.
Some places.
So you have all of these transitions in life that people are dealing with, and everybody don't transition well.
Wow.
Things happen, things come up, and everybody don't deal with them. It doesn't go easy, and we have to be mindful of that. That has to be one of the things that we're looking for, is how they are dealing with those changes, how they are dealing with puberty, how are they dealing with that new teacher. We don't even talk about that. We think about it from our standpoint of how a boss is. If you've ever been at a job where, oh man, I do not appreciate this person that's supervising me. But we get a chance to voice it or maybe go over their head. And where a kid technically can do that, in most cases, what's going to happen? The principal is going to back the teacher. The parent is going to say, well, you need to at least respect this teacher because they're trying to teach you a lesson of you got to endure people. You got to be able to persevere. But what if that teacher's really being inappropriate or displaying some microaggressions that's really, really contributing to what we know as trauma?
And I don't want to say if. I can truly say being in school environments, that does occur. I think one of the things that we have to really be conscious about, I know we're looking at 10 and 14, but I don't want to neglect, suicidal ideation starts a lot younger with a lot of children.
Yeah.
Because what I noticed and what I seen was, as I stated, children are very observant, and you guys know when you interacting with children, they're very direct. They come out and say a lot of things, but they don't always know the emotional effects of those things, because although they may understand or recognize an emotion, they don't know the effects of that emotion and what that can do. I think often what we also have to think of, just as we are struggling with a lot of things in like stabilizing home environments, other things, children are carrying that weight with them to wherever they go. You know what I'm saying? Because whatever financial difficulty that I as a parent may be encountering, whether I want to acknowledge it or not, that's a direct impact to my child, right? The limitations that I have, whatever the case may be, children are experiencing that. And I know firsthand, hearing children say some off-the-wall things, thinking it was humorous. For an example, I can remember there was a child whose mother may have been sick or like dying from cancer, and another child made a comment about it as if it was a joke, but again, not really understanding what that meant. And so you're looking at this child to where, not only am I now being bullied, about my parent or my family member's illness, I'm going home and I'm dealing with the idea of loss. You know what I'm saying? And what that looks like, the changes in accessibility, the changes in different things. And so change, like you mentioned, is inevitable. It's really hard for us as an adults, and really sometimes you can't really process everything that's going on. And so I think that's kind of what you got to be looking for. I think also is recognizing what we're dealing with as adults. It does affect our children, regardless of how much we, sometimes try to prevent them from doing it. And I think it's important that we be transparent about what's really going on. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And kind of deciphering some of the availability of information, because children are listening, they are hearing, and they are experiencing, and it is affecting them.
I'm glad you brought in the adults, because we didn't want to just stay right there with kids.
Right.
But it goes on to the teenagers and what they're dealing with from high school to college, and identity.
Right.
And Ty gonna kill me for this, jumping on to Dr. Rita Walker. She talks about identity and how in the African American community, I'm gonna make sure I say it correctly. Black people consider themselves resilient to a detriment sometimes. That we just kind of keep stuff, and then it just kind of weighs on us. We feel like we can endure struggles instead of just talking about them and releasing them and getting help for that. But beyond the teenagers and that identity, even with what I want to say about identity is, at different points in our life, we gain identity. So somebody might gain it early on as, I'm an athlete. I'm one of the best in my area. One of my identities that I gained is when I went to college, an old college boy. I was one of the few people in my group that went to college. And definitely now, as I mentioned in another episode, I'm one of the few black male therapists. That's an identity for me. And if you take that from me, then what happens? Fortunately for me, I think I still have my family. But man, if you take both of those from me, I don't know how I would respond. And then when you said earlier, you said how adults deal with the changes in life. People see that. People around you see that, especially those kids, and that can rub off on them. They see whether you internalizing it. They see if you're acting out. They see if you look, to some degree suicidal. Right. If you've ever said it. So, when we're talking about what we're looking at, we even as adults have to look at ourselves.
I think we're also highlighting like risk factors, and you kind of mentioned that even before looking for what we consider warning signs, like individuals who may have had a prior suicidal attempt, individuals who may suffer with a mental illness, such as depression and many other mental health disorders, those who may abuse substances, family history of mental health, family history of substance abuse, family violence, whether that's physical, verbal, witnessing sexual, and that goes into that trauma component, even having weapons that aren't secured in the home. We can talk more about that, but just even being in prison, certain environments, can have an impact on how one views life or how one chooses to escape some emotional pain. Then when you go into warning signs, like really what we kind of want to look out for, and again, you guys mentioned it, changes in mood, even simple things, changing in somebody's eating habits, changes in someone's sleeping habits. If you notice someone is more isolated or more withdrawn, outside of any physical health issues, if you notice certain language that people are starting to use, even if they're very direct, I don't want to be here anymore. Well, let's explore that a little. What do you mean you don't want to be here anymore? Or I wouldn't mind if I wouldn't wake up in the morning, or if I don't wake up in the morning, or my family would be better off without me. Just those verbalized, I guess, those type of threats that you may hear an individual speak of. Physical appearance, you may notice that they start to neglect their daily hygienes. They may again, I talked about isolation, and even in the workplace, you may notice your colleague isn't working a lot, or you may hear your colleague say, I'm just overwhelmed, no, I'm stressed. And that doesn't mean immediately jump on the board and say, hey, oh yeah, they're suicidal, because there are definitely different levels, minimum, moderate severity levels that you want to, I guess, assess for. But just like you guys indicated too, those are some things to look out for, and we don't want to be dismissive or minimize what someone is experiencing. Even Dr. Rita Walker highlights the language of crying out for help. Like, really, what does that mean? And I think I could be wrong, because I haven't read through the book in a while, but she even talks about just that statement alone. Is it really helpful? Somebody crying out for help. But maybe we can talk more about just that statement alone. But it is an indicator that something is going on, and
I like how you said
it needs to be addressed.
I like how you said when you say explore. Yeah, that's it's a small word, but it's real big. Just to what is connecting you saying, making that statement? You know, at 5 years old or at 9, 15, whatever it is, exploring it instead of putting on them, well, you shouldn't feel like this because this is happening, and you got this going for yourself, and well, you really haven't faced anything yet.
Yeah.
Or it's not that bad.
Yes.
It's not that bad for you. You have to respect their reality. She talk about psychological factors and stuff like that, but everybody's psychological factors are different. Did I say that right? But really exploring is a big deal. Like, when somebody make that statement, you know, we should be trying to figure out why without actually asking them why, but we should be trying to find out why.
The thing that goes along too with that myth or belief that Black people, you know, have a higher threshold for pain, and then we're seeing it within our, well, kind of the opposite within our kids with the numbers that you guys gave out. Obviously not, you know, and just even outside of kids and adolescents, even adults, you know, I guess our ways of coping with stressful situations, traumatic situations, and I guess our response to it is it's alarming. When you look at the numbers and being mindful too, everybody ain't accounted for.
Right.
Yeah, yeah. we don't even know about the people that don't come forth. There's Alfred Brindley Nova said, for Black children, when they have mental health issues, they're treated for depression, anxiety. They're not treated for depression, anxiety, or trauma, but more so ODD and conduct disorder. ODD being oppositional defiant disorder, and you know that's big too. If you actually do make that step to go into therapy and then you're misdiagnosed, that's where it's really important that you have a culturally competent therapist that's gonna really get to the root of the problem, connect what factors are influencing you and affecting you. And you know, a lot of times we feel like, I know I do as a parent, I feel like, man, I'm protecting my kids, I'm giving them the best life, they have this, they have that, but that does not prevent them from having their own individual thoughts about the world, perceiving the world.
And I think it's important to know too that a child experiencing suicidal ideation or even having a suicidal attempt is not a direct impact of that parent or that guardian.
Yes.
And a lot of times parents really, or even guardians, take on that ownership that they've necessarily done something wrong, like it's their fault. And so, you know, to be able to really deal and address that experience is challenging, because how do I, you know, I'm to blame for my child's emotions or their experiences or what they're feeling, but they're experiencing a lot of things that unfortunately we don't have control over, you know, and that's one of those things that I think you're talking about. And when I hear that statement about, you know, oppositional defiance disorder or just conduct disorder, I'm thinking about how often our children oftentimes turn aggressive when they're upset. You know what I'm saying? But that's because we are projecting aggression, right? We got to teach them the defense mechanisms. They got to know how to fight, right? You don't let nobody walk over you. Don't. So that's all that they're really kind of being taught to do, is to defend themselves. So then when you carry that on, that's their initial response to everything. So when something doesn't feel right to them, or it feels like, abnormal to them, that's what they're going to resort to. And a lot of times it leads to the behavior versus really addressing the actual issue. And that's really what takes place. A lot of times you can see that, even with how I think teachers respond to children. Like, it's easy to, say that this child may be depressive if that child comes in, just sits down, doesn't really say anything. They don't be classified as problematic, versus someone who may be struggling with something, who may be outspoken, who may not pay attention. You only are recognizing their behaviors. You're not really looking at the, socioeconomic challenges that they may be experiencing, that may be a result of what they're having. When you sit down and really listen to children say a lot. They say so much, but you really have to kind of, like you said, explore that concept of what's really going on here. And really knowing and engaging, like you said, that cultural competency when you're looking into therapists or you're looking into other support avenues to make sure our children get what they actually need.
You mentioned a good point. In regards to, sometimes I guess as parents we're instilling in our children, you gotta fight, in a sense, whether that's with words or physical action,
right.
Or physical attacks. But looking at why are we continuously telling our children that, and I think you have to look at just history within the world. You know what I mean? When we were enslaved, or when some of us were enslaved, being able to try to be a protector in the midst of having your oppressors telling you what to do, I can kind of see how that has been passed down from generation to generation to generation. You got to be strong. You got to protect yourself. Don't let anybody overstep your boundaries. And which that is true. That's just an example. But looking, I as you were saying, I was just thinking about it from that context. Okay, I know plenty of people and plenty of relatives who have shared that same line over and over and over and over again, and I'm trying to see the connection, and I think that goes back to what Kervin said, the disconnect from our culture, the cultural, the loss of our cultural identity. I just wanted to share that because that was a good point that you made, and it just made me kind of sit here and assess, why do we do that? But when you got a society that's against you, and when you have heard countless times that what you got going on and how you look, in the lack of better words, ain't right, what you got to contribute is meaningless, well then I am going to turn it inward and have that aggression and that hatred, and then it may come out onto others, which leads to going back to the topic, or even suicide. I don't see myself as worthy, so yeah, my parents are better off without me.
And I think that's a lot too. I think one of the things, I experienced a lot of times, and I had to have this conversation a lot of times with my families. We have to be very careful about the conversations we have amongst children.
Ooh, yes.
Because children, where we might go back and process something, children take your words at face value. If you say you don't love them, you don't care about them, even if you don't mean it, in that moment, they internalized it. And so kind of what you're talking about, Ty, is when we're dealing with so much, past trauma, so much, from a societal level, from a personal level. Life in itself has its own trauma and experiences and challenges. So when we add that to additionally being told we don't belong by our family members, being told in our schools we don't belong, what else do a lot of children do other than to say, you know what, really, maybe I don't belong here. You know what, maybe they would be better if they don't hear me. Or if you have a child that, is living with a single mother or a single father, and, you're seeing, your parents struggle with adequate child care. You're seeing them struggle with just trying to provide your basic necessities. You're looking at life, well, maybe mama would be better if she didn't have me to worry about. You know what I'm saying? You're seeing your children cry. And again, it's not saying that because you're in that situation that your it's justifiable or that you're to blame, but it's saying that these real life factors affect people. You know what I'm saying? They really affect us, and even us as adults experience that. You know how life, is so challenging every day when you're already going through so much. Every and any little thing can be that final trigger where you can just say enough is enough. You know what I'm saying? Like I'm really at my breaking point, and it don't always be just that little situation that caused the breaking, but it's just things on top of things on top of things, and that's what we're dealing with a lot when we're talking about this idea or the severity of a suicide. And I think, Kervin, you kind of mentioned something that was very significant too. I think understanding that a crisis is still a crisis for the person that's experiencing that crisis. Yeah. Like even in our clinical expert, it's easily to dismiss somebody when somebody says, you know what, I'm just having a hard time on my job. The first thing people say, well, at least you got one. It's a lot of people that ain't got no job. You know what I'm saying?
Or get another one. Just leave
you ain't. That's something you chose. You chose to do that, but it doesn't negate that. That's an experience, and that's a real life challenge for you. Or people say, that you chose to be that way. A lot of times, or body images, or whatever the case may be. But people are really struggling with these. These are real life situations for them that put them in this predicament or puts them in this place. And so as we kind of cultivate, you start with this ideation that builds upon thing. And I think one of the reasons it's so significant about children is oftentimes I always would educate my parents and tell them, remember that children are oftentimes impulsive. We as adults are sometimes impulsive too, which means they're not thinking about the aftermath. This is the right thing to do, this is what I need to do, and I'm gonna carry it out. You know what I'm saying? And that's what's really going on a lot of times. And so the significance of us just kind of advocating for our children on what they're going about, because we've also been taught what goes on in this house stays in this house, right? So I can't really go out and talk about what's going on with anybody else because I might get in trouble about it. You know what I'm saying? But it's bothering me. So what do we really do? What is the solution in that?
And when you say children are impulsive, I believe I learned it as our brain don't stop developing for women until 25, men until 28, 30, I think 28. So, of course, we're going to be impulsive, right? And if we're going to be impulsive as a parent or as a guardian or a friend, how do you know what's in somebody's head if you don't have these conversations? And that goes back to, I think Ty was saying in the last episode about being able to get stuff out. I said there are some things left better unsaid. And she was saying, no, we should get them out, right? But if that person is not talkative, then you as a friend or a guardian or whatever you are to that person, have those conversations. Push them to talk about it. And when I say push them, I don't mean, hey, what's wrong with you? Just beating them over the head. They're just being in the room and trying to have a 5-minute conversation about nothing could lead to more than just what y'all initially started with. But we got to start having these conversations, the conversations we're having now, but prior to that, just having regular conversation, as you said, keeping it open instead of us saying, what stays in this house, stay in this house, or I ain't gonna deal with that. They in their room, they ain't bothering me. We got technology now that's killing us, and it's killing our conversation. We're more connected, but we're also more disconnected because we're so in tune into those that telephone. To the point that some people are texting. I have done this. I have to admit it. I have been in one area of the bed of the house and text my wife instead of going into the room to have this conversation. Well, not conversation, but go ahead and ask her whatever I was texting. But beyond that, then also what I've seen a lot of is putting kids into a lot of different things. It's football on to soccer, from soccer to basketball, from basketball to baseball, and so on and so forth. And at what point do you have time to sit down and really eat dinner and talk? We just keeping them busy, but in the time that they're busy, when are we processing all this busyness? When they're busy, who are they around? What if they're around somebody who's introducing them to something that they can't process? How are they processing it? And even if they were in therapy, they're only going to therapy for that 1 hour. As a guardian, should they not be processing that on a regular basis with mom and dad? I say mom and dad. It could be an aunt. It could be an uncle. It could be anybody. But these conversations are really important to have so that we can not only look for things, but things can be brought to us out of those conversations. And once they're brought to us, once we do see it, how do we help at that point?
And then, yeah, kind of going with what you're saying, being okay with talking about suicide, and just saying the word suicide, I think there's this myth, that if we talk about it, it may increase the likelihood that this individual may act on these attempts. I ain't seen no research. I could be wrong, but I haven't seen any research that indicates that, Bob spoke to Jane about suicide, and 5 days later, Jane died by suicide. Not to say that there haven't been any storylines that may be a little similar, but we still need to have the conversation. Nor does research say by having a conversation, it's going to decrease the likelihood that someone may die by suicide, because in reality, it ain't up to us at the end of the day to make that decision for that individual. That individual, majority of the time, has already made up their mind whether or not they're going to choose to commit this act. But we can help with preventative methods, and I think we're going to talk about ways to kind of assist even ourselves if we're experiencing these things or other ones. But really getting comfortable with having the conversation and checking in with yourself. I think, again, self-awareness is key. If I'm a guardian, how am I going to have a conversation with my child about emotional regulation or being able to articulate their emotions if I haven't even checked in with myself and being brutally honest with myself about how I feel? It's going to be challenging when we're at the dinner table kind of wanting our kids to talk about things, but we have yet to disclose those things. So being transparent and honest with yourself and then with others, I think can kind of ease the conversation, about, well, how are you feeling today and how did it make you feel, and not being dismissive, to hopefully, I guess introduce some preventative methods to kind of decrease these numbers that we're seeing.
And I think you spoke on something that's so critical, Ty. Ultimately, we don't have the ability to take someone's decision to die by suicide. That is, their personal choice. But I think it's critical, too, that we don't always assume that person is weak or that was a cop-out for them. And that's a lot of times what people say, well, life wasn't that hard for them, or they could have just talked to somebody. But, research does suggest that most of the time people who die by suicide don't actually want to die. Mm-hmm. Initially, that's not what there is, but there's just so much that's going on in life for them that it becomes overwhelming. You know what I'm saying?
Tired of it.
They're tired. And I don't know if anybody, I just think about, I've experienced a lot of grief in my life, and a lot of the times when those people are getting ready to transition, one of the very things I always hear them say is, "I'm tired." Mm-hmm. That's kind of that key statement that says, I'm at my breaking point. Like, I've been as strong as I can be for as long as I can be it. And at this point, I just don't get it. And I think that's what we have to really meet people at, is when you start seeing and hearing people say, "I'm tired," that's really is that asking for that help and asking for that support, and really taking attentiveness to that need. You know what I'm saying? And it's not meaning that we all are going to be expert. It doesn't mean that you're going to have the solution, and it doesn't mean that you're going to be able to actually solve their problem. But it means that you care enough to really say, well, what can we do about it? Let's problem solve. Let's get together and see if we can connect you with a professional who can help you through this process. It may mean that, we develop this support group. And I just really started thinking about support groups are so significant, but they're oftentimes so undermining. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. Like, the power of being socially connected to somebody can really change somebody's view and spacing on life. Like, having somebody to know, I'm not in this journey alone, really can take somebody's mind from, okay, I can't handle this anymore, where, just let me just take this one problem at a time. Let me take this 1 hour at a time. And I've even had clients and children who I've said, sometimes we got to go minute by minute with this thing. Mm-hmm. You know what I'm saying? Mm-hmm. We really got to process this minute by minute. And we really can't, you ain't got to put this mask on with me. And that's one of the, transparencies that I think we got to create, is where we have to allow people to take off their mask and live in their truth. And we have to be willing to do that so that we don't get overconsumed by this idea of what our life should be or what somebody else's life should be, because oftentimes we're looking through it from our own experience. I can say little Johnny didn't have a reason to, carry this act out, or what, they should have came and talked to somebody. But you know what, I've also remember there was times when somebody tried to talk to me and I was just too busy. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
It was just something going on. So it wasn't that I wasn't trying to listen. I didn't recognize that. And that's the importance of us just really being, and like you said, having these conversations, because we're able to kind of really reset the room in some ways. And, again, respecting people's, rights and decision. But I also think it's important that we don't actually sometimes glorify the act, because sometimes we focus on the suicide itself and not the preventions. Because if we can look at how do we help this, or how do we decrease this number versus why did it happen? You really can't change the why when it's already happened. When somebody has already, taken their life, when they've already died by suicide, there's nothing else we can do for that individual. But how do we stop this from happening to another child? Or how do we let someone know, here is an opportunity. There's a place or a system that, support that you can have, so that you know that you're not in this path or this journey alone.
You said something about being too busy. And it reminded me of a quote that Dr. Rita Walker said, be careful about how you hide yourself from people who care.
That part.
That is so...
That part. Because
so
how can I
big.
know, if my loved one is in need of something, if they're socially withdrawn, they're busy themselves, they've experienced so much, I guess, the unspoken pain and unspoken trauma, can kind of, I guess, contribute to these things. But I don't even know where I'm going with this. I guess just as a person, who want to try to help individuals, prevent these things from occurring, understanding with you going in, again, I cannot determine whether or not this person go through with this act, but here are these things that I can do to ensure that I try to implement some type of preventative methods with hopes that this individual doesn't go through with this act. But I know going in, it's out of my control. But here's what I can offer, and you being okay with that and not carrying that guilt. If it comes down to it where you've had a conversation with this individual and then they carry out the acts, you being okay, hopefully, with all that you could offer, but being aware, like we said, the risk factors, the warning signs, and what to look for. And I think we're going to go into more detail about what can we actually do.
Yeah. Knowing that you can't stop it. You cannot stop it. But going into what we can do, the ABCs, according to Dr. Rita Walker, assume you can help. You can't stop it, but you can help. What you mean I can help, but I can't stop it? You can be there.
Right.
Just being there will make a difference. Being a good listener while you are there. Not trying to necessarily solve the problem, but just simply being a good listener. And then counsel out judgment. You want to elaborate on counsel out judgment? I mean, it's kind of self-explanatory, but
I think it kind of goes back to what we kind of been saying, and it echoes that, is that sometimes we can only see the world from our own perspective. So I can only see the world from my own lens, and sometimes I can tell you, well, I would do something differently, but you don't have what I have. You know what I'm saying? And you can't respond to what you're responding to with it. I think it's good to counsel out judgment, because a person can always sense sometimes when they're being judged, and it can cause the opposite of what you're trying to achieve. So the minute that I feel like I'm being judged, or I feel like my experience is being minimized, it's kind of like what we talked on that previous episode with communication. I'm going to go into a state of defense, and that defense may be I may shut down altogether, or I may explode, and it may just, this even validates even more why my existence is not there. And that's why you really need to counsel out judgment, because it's not a time of judgment. It's really a time of being empathetic to a person's experience. Recognizing that people, I always say, people are hurting. And a lot of people are in need of help. And there's just a lot that's going on as a society when we're looking at things, that is really out of people's control. Just really waking up in the morning for some people is a difficult task. We talk about getting ready for work. We talk about all these things. But sometimes it's just a lot to where what do we do? And I always used to tell my kids, what can I do if I'm stacking books on top of books? You might can hold the first 2 or 3. But eventually, the more I give to you, the more you're holding on to, the weaker you're going to become. So at some point, either you're going to give it up or it's going to break you down. And that's what I think about when you're dealing with a person that's with suicide. They're carrying everything, and they don't really know how to ask for help. But how can we help is that I see that you're carrying that load, and whether you ask me for not, I come and take that book off of there for you. You know what I'm saying? That's the helping mechanism that I'm applying for you. Not me seeing that load and being like, well, I had to carry my books up the stairs. That's on you. It's like, no. In that moment, I need you to help. Whether I say, you know what, because I'm going to try. The strength and the resilience of us as a culture and as a community is I can do it. I don't really need to ask nobody for help. But the reality is the load gets heavier and heavier every day that we're told, that we're told it, right? So I need you to help me even if you don't really know it's helping. And I don't know if you guys have ever been in that spacing, but you ever had somebody just really do something for you? You ain't asked them to do it, but you was like, man, it really helped me out that day. You know what I'm saying? Well, like, I'm like, man, like somebody say, man, I just thought about you. Or they call you and say, man, I'm going to bring you lunch. And you like, man, I didn't even bring no lunch, or I didn't even have that money. They didn't realize what they were doing for you, but it blessed you in such a way, and it changed either your perspective for that day or just your perspective of life in general. And so I think of that when I'm dealing with people who are experiencing suicidal ideation, somebody with this. And I understand that where they are presently doesn't mean that's what they have to stay, but I understand it's a day in progress. You know what I'm saying? And for some people, that may ultimately be their final decision. But like Ty said, I'm giving the best that I have. I'm going to assume the responsibility of let me try to support you. Let me try to advocate and so, give you preventative interventions that I can do or that I can actually include to help during that process, regardless of what that looks like. And I think, Ty kind of talked about that earlier too, where we're talking about accessibility to like lethal means. A lot of people have bought guns just because the change in climate. You know what I'm saying? Things going on, times are different now. And so children also are having accessibility to things that, we might have didn't have as children. I know for, back in the day, my mama didn't really believe in having guns in the house. That was a no-no. And now I, as a parent, struggle with it. Like, should I have a gun in my house? Should I not have a gun in my house? Because I understand that accessibility sometimes increases the likelihood, right? Because if I'm in that moment and I'm in that mind frame, if I am having that ideation, I do have a plan in place. I know, that there's a gun in the house. Now I'm looking at, okay, I know mom worked this time, daddy worked this time. This is my time. I'm kind of escalating, the event, and it kind of puts me in a preparation. And a lot of times we're not thinking of it that way. Right? Because when we're thinking about it, you also have parents who are thinking at the same time, somebody trying to break in, I need to have that accessibility, right? So it's those components of, just being really conscious about what's going on and having those dialogue and that conversation, like Ty said, about exploring the idea of what this really could lead to.
Yeah, and I think also we don't want to glorify the act of suicide.
Right.
And to me, to be honest, I think as a culture we don't glorify it, but to our detriment, we avoid it. We don't glorify it, we avoid it, or we talk so bad about it that someone who is thinking about it wouldn't be willing to come forth. And a thought just came to me as we were talking. We didn't really cover the older generation, over 50, over 60.
Yeah.
They're just because they're 50 and 60 don't mean that they won't commit suicide. When people look back over their life and they feel as if they haven't contributed, or maybe all the people in their life are gone that they were close to, those things can lead to it too. I'm giving these things out because we never know what somebody's mind is. Everybody experiences life differently, and these things can affect them to the point that they actually think about suicide. Again, going back to the ABCs, assume that you can help. Just because you're 20 and this person is 60 don't mean that you can't help. You can help by having a conversation and being there, and vice versa. Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Kervin. And again, I guess it just shows that you really care. Even if I'm just inquiring or asking about it, and that the individual may be in such a shock that you are even aware, and that you're asking them this this genuine question that you may not even be ready to answer, though you kind of got a response to it. It's like, wow, they really see me or they really hear me. And I think going back to when she talks about being a good listener, if you are engaging in conversations with someone who is possibly having suicidal thoughts, ideations, maybe have exposed a plan, or somebody who's just in emotional distress, understanding and listening for a turning point, meaning that individual, they may say, or they may be ambivalent again just about living life, but if you can listen out for a turning point, and what I mean by turning point, something that means that they still want to live, whether it be, I don't know, it's kind of hard for me to give an example. I'm sorry,
like
y'all,
somebody, no, I don't like somebody saying, you know, I'm worried about my children, you know, what's going to happen to my children once I'm gone, or, you know, who's going to take care of my dog, you know what I'm saying? It's something that, you know, they still have purpose for, or, you know, I want to finish school. Like, anything can really be a turning point, just depending on what that person values for their life. So, yeah.
That's what you want to listen out for and kind of reiterate that to them, so that means that there's still some purpose, some hope that you want to live, because you're still concerned about your children's well-being, you know, and for someone, you know, who may be wanting to check out or die by suicide, the concerns of other people won't be as, you know, prevalent because your mind is already made up. So if I'm hearing these things, it's like, okay, you still want, can I ask that you still want to live? And if that's what we're agreeing upon, how can we make a safety plan? And if you guys ever go to therapy, or hopefully this conversation is being had in school, or even if you want to do it in your own home, creating a safety plan, a tool that you can go back to, whether it's a safety box, just a figure of speech, but literally if you want to create a safety box of helping mechanisms or tools to help you and or an individual minimize those thoughts, discard that plan, you know, walking you into whether it's a therapist's office, the emergency room, whatever the case may be, then so be it. But I think, you know, really listening, you know, and canceling out all of those judgments and being mindful of what you say, because you may not think it's judgment if I say, well, I had to carry my own load. I didn't mean anything by it, but really, how did that help me?
Right.
And listening is a skill. There are professionals out there to do it. We're not telling you to be the professional, but you can be that first step by being there, and then you can connect them to a professional. Suicide prevention, 1-800-273-8255. There's a song with it. 1-800-273-8255. That's the suicide prevention hotline. You can always, once you are there, you can always lead that person to that. And then there's crisis counseling that you can text, I believe, 741-741. And then this is a new one that I didn't know about, wannatalkaboutit.com. I did not know about that one, but definitely can reach out to them. So, again, we're not asking you to be the therapist. We're not suggesting that you be a therapist, but you can assume that you can help just by being there, just by having these conversations, being open to listening to someone and not judging them. You know how many people walk around just don't want to be judged, just accept me for me. And if my nephew listen to this, he gonna get me on that one, because we have these conversations about judgment all the time. But just being non-judgmental will have people attracted to you. People will come to you because they feel like they can talk to you. They feel like you're not going to cast down whatever idea or thoughts that they have in their head. Did y'all have any closing thoughts?
I just think that that's powerful. What you said is that people are drawn to you when you don't practice that judgment, and I think that that's so powerful when we're looking at every aspect of life, because I just know in generations, I'm grateful for this field, because I think this field has taught me that that you really can't have judgment when you're really trying to help people. And that's one of the most critical things is, if you're really intending to help someone, judgment has to be canceled. You know what I'm saying? Because a person has a right to feel whatever they're feeling, and we have to validate those emotions. But I think, like what Ty pointed out, is providing the alternative. Let's explore some things, and I think that's so critical when we're looking at the ABC method. And I really like the idea of even adding E. You know what I'm saying? Assume you can help.
Now you gonna have to get some
Dr.
licensing
Rita
or something for that.
she gonna get me. Nah, if you hearing this, Dr. Way, I'm sorry, but I like that. Just adding that concept of explore. exploring the alternative solutions. You know what I'm saying? What can we do? You know what I'm saying? Can we talk about this before you move forward with this act? You know what I'm saying? And I think that just really leads to a key concept of respecting individuals. So I like that.
What if I ain't got nobody to talk to? What if I don't trust people? What if I've been judged for everything that I've said or done? What do I do?
You asking the question, or is that? Oh, what? So you can put us on the spot like that?
Either it's a question we can leave as we're closing, or it's a question we can engage in. I mean,
I think if you don't have anyone to talk to, I think that's where those crisis lines come into place. Because even if you can't in your mind think of someone, there is someone there to listen. So that's why the preventativeness of, educating and having that awareness and those numbers, and just knowing that, you know what, you can't put a name to that person that you can trust, but if you can write down a number, if you can text, if you can call, there's someone on that line willing to help you. And I think that's the most critical thing. And sometimes, you know what, if I can't say anything, I can't talk to someone, I know I don't feel right. Let me just go in. Let me go check into. Maybe I just need to go to the emergency room for a little bit. And if I just have to tell them, you know what, it's just something's not right with me. You know what I'm saying? Because at that point, most of the time, you're going to get an assessment. And so that person can either then explore with you that concept or get you connected with other resources. So even if you don't trust someone, believe that the idea of there is someone that can help you. That would be my concept.
And I'm not going to really mess with that too much, but the same way I, as a person, have to assume that I can help, you have to assume that there is somebody in the world that is going to be available to me. I know I'm available. Now, I ain't available all the time, and if you can reach me and I got that time, I'm going to be there for you. Same way with you, D. Same way with you, Ty. I know us three will be there. If you can reach us in the moment that we're not doing anything, a lot of times we're gonna give it back to you. So it's people out there, and we ain't the only therapists in the world. We're not the only therapists in the world. People out there, and then not to mention what she just said. Those that number, the website, the text, and those three things you can do. So there is somebody out there. For every problem there is a solution. Problem is we don't always like the solution. Right? You might not like the fact that I got to go to this website. You might not like the fact that I have to call this particular number, but it's somebody out there. Any closing thoughts?
That's it.
Okay. Stay true to self. Yeah.
And this was a heavy topic. I knew it was going to be heavy when we started it. But, the passion kind of comes out as you begin to talk about it, because ultimately you don't want the demise of anybody to happen in any way, shape, form, or fashion. Once again, I'm one of your hosts, Kervin. Check us out on Facebook and Instagram, Speaking with Gravity. You can just type that in and find us on Facebook and Instagram. If we said something to make you think that you can use therapy or seek a professional in your area, again, reach out to us, send us a message, and we'll try to point you in the right direction. Thank you to all of those who believe in us and support us, our family members, our significant others, and also thank you, the audience, for taking the time to listen. You could be talking to anyone, listening to anyone else, but you chose to listen to us, and we appreciate that. Remember, I'm a therapist. We're all therapists, but this ain't therapy. It's just a podcast.